The doors were locked. Yusuf was alone inside the house, far from anyone who could immediately come to his aid, and the woman who had authority in that home had already made her intention clear. From a worldly perspective, escape seemed almost impossible. Yet this is exactly where the story reveals something powerful about Yusuf. He did not treat temptation as something to negotiate with. The Quran describes how the wife of Al-Aziz closed the doors and called Yusuf toward her. He was young, far from his family, and living under the roof of the very people who controlled his circumstances. Saying no could carry consequences. Giving in could remain hidden from everyone outside that room. But Yusuf understood something more important. A locked door can hide an action from people, but it cannot hide it from Allah. So when the pressure reached its most dangerous point, his response was not curiosity, hesitation, or compromise. Before he ran toward the door, before the chase, and before the torn shirt became evidence, Yusuf anchored himself with words that revealed exactly where his strength came from. I seek refuge in Allah. Those words, I seek refuge in Allah, were more than a refusal. They reveal what happened inside Yusuf before anything happened around him. He recognized the danger immediately and turned his heart toward Allah before taking any physical action. The temptation was private, the doors were closed, and no human witness seemed present. Yet for Yusuf, the absence of people did not mean the absence of accountability. That is what makes his response so powerful. He did not begin by debating how far he could go without crossing a line. He did not search for an excuse based on pressure, youth, isolation, or circumstance. His first instinct was protection. Seek refuge in Allah and refuse the path altogether. This changes how we understand resistance to temptation. The real battle often begins before the action itself, in the moment when the heart decides whose command matters most. Yusuf settled that question immediately, but faith was not meant to remain only in words. Once he had rejected the invitation in his heart, he still had to act, and that created an extraordinary question. If the doors had already been locked, why did Yusuf run toward them anyway? Because running was itself part of the answer. Yusuf had already sought refuge in Allah, but he did not remain beside the temptation and simply depend on willpower. He moved away from it. The Quran tells us that they raced toward the door, turning a spiritual decision into immediate physical action. That detail matters. The doors had been secured earlier, yet Yusuf still headed toward the exit. He did not wait for certainty that escape would be easy. His responsibility was to move away from what Allah had forbidden and take whatever path of escape was available to him. There is a powerful lesson in that movement. Trusting Allah does not mean remaining unnecessarily close to danger. Sometimes sincerity is shown by creating distance, leaving the place, ending the opportunity, and refusing to give temptation more time to weaken your resolve. Yusuf ran before he knew exactly how the situation would unfold. And then, something remarkable happened. The private temptation suddenly became a race, with Yusuf moving toward the door and the woman pursuing him from behind. In that struggle, she reached for his shirt, and what happened to that shirt would soon become crucial evidence. And that torn shirt captured the entire direction of the struggle. Yusuf was moving away while she was trying to stop him. The Quran says they raced toward the door, and his shirt was torn from behind. That single detail would later matter far more than either of them could have expected in that moment. Yusuf was not pursuing temptation, he was escaping it. His movement was forward, toward the exit, while the tear appeared at his back. The physical evidence silently preserved what had actually happened inside a room where no other person had witnessed the beginning. This is one of the most striking parts of the story. Yusuf did not know that his torn shirt would become part of his defense. He only knew that he had to get away. Yet while he was choosing obedience, evidence was being created without him planning it. Then, the tension changed instantly. The race reached the door. The private struggle was about to become public, and the person standing there would force both Yusuf and the woman to face a completely different danger. And standing at that door was Al-Aziz, her husband. In a single moment, everything changed. What had been hidden behind closed doors was now exposed to someone whose presence neither side could ignore. For Yusuf, this encounter carried enormous risk. He was a young man living in the household of a powerful official, and the woman beside him was the official's own wife. The imbalance of power was obvious. Yusuf knew the truth of what had happened, but truth alone does not always protect someone from an immediate accusation. For the woman, the danger was different. The situation she had tried to keep secret had suddenly reached the one person whose judgment mattered most inside that home. She had only moments to react. That is what makes the scene so tense. Yusuf had reached the door seeking escape, yet freedom did not immediately arrive. Instead, he stepped into another test, one involving reputation, authority, and blame. And before Yusuf could fully explain what had happened, the story was turned against him. She reacted immediately. Instead of admitting what had happened, the wife of Al-Aziz presented Yusuf as the one who had intended wrongdoing. The Quran records her asking what punishment should be given to someone who intended evil toward the ruler's wife, suggesting imprisonment or another painful punishment. The reversal was sudden. Moments earlier, Yusuf had been the one trying to escape. Now he was standing before the man whose household had sheltered him, facing an accusation that could destroy his reputation and his freedom. Yusuf did not remain silent. He stated the truth clearly. She was the one who had tried to seduce him. Now there were two opposing accounts of what had happened behind those closed doors. And this is where the story becomes remarkable. There had been no witness inside the room to describe the chase. No one had watched Yusuf run toward the exit. Yet, the truth had left behind something physical, something neither accusation could easily explain away. The answer was still hanging from Yusuf's back, the torn shirt. The shirt did more than show that a struggle had taken place, it revealed its direction. The Quran tells us that a witness from her household proposed a simple test. If Yusuf's shirt had been torn from the front, her accusation would appear truthful. But if it had been torn from behind, then Yusuf was telling the truth. When the shirt was examined, it was torn from the back. That detail changed everything. A tear from behind matched the story of someone moving away while being grabbed and pursued. The very act meant to stop Yusuf from escaping had become evidence supporting his innocence. Nothing about that evidence had been planned by him. Yusuf had not stopped to collect proof or prepare a defense. He had simply chosen obedience and moved toward the door. Yet, the truth left a trace behind. And this brings us back to the decision that started the entire chase. Yusuf ran. To some, running can look like weakness. But in this moment, it revealed something very different. The strength to leave temptation before temptation could gain control. That strength came from knowing when not to stay and fight. Yusuf did not prove his faith by standing beside temptation and testing how long he could resist it. He proved it by creating distance from the situation itself. That distinction matters. Courage is not always remaining in place. Sometimes, courage is recognizing that the safest victory is to leave before the heart begins making excuses. Yusuf had every reason, from a worldly perspective, to hesitate. The doors were closed, the pressure was intense, and the consequences of rejection were uncertain. Yet, he still chose movement over compromise. Running then was not an admission of weakness. It was a disciplined response to danger. He understood that temptation becomes more dangerous when a person gives it time, privacy, and repeated attention. By moving toward the door, Yusuf refused to give that moment any more power than it already had. And that is where his story stops being only about one extraordinary event in the past. His decision reveals a principle that still matters whenever temptation appears. Sometimes the most powerful way to defeat it is not to argue with it, but to escape it before it begins controlling your choices. That principle becomes practical the moment temptation enters our own lives. Yusuf teaches us not to wait until desire becomes stronger than judgment. The earlier we recognize danger, the easier it is to protect the heart. Sometimes that means leaving a place. Sometimes it means ending a conversation, closing a door to temptation, or removing access to what repeatedly pulls us toward wrongdoing. The lesson is not simply to resist it, is to make resistance easier by creating distance. Yusuf did not ask how close he could remain without falling. He moved away. And perhaps that is the deeper meaning of his escape. Victory is not always standing your ground. Sometimes, victory begins the moment you choose to leave the room. And that is what makes Yusuf's decision so powerful. The locked doors were never the final measure of his freedom. His real freedom was the ability to choose obedience Even when temptation, secrecy, and pressure surrounded him, he ran because protecting his faith mattered more than appearing fearless. He moved toward an uncertain exit rather than remain beside a certain danger, and Allah caused the truth of that choice to become visible through the very shirt torn during his escape. The lesson reaches far beyond that room. Strength is not always proving that you can stand beside temptation without falling. Sometimes, the wiser victory is refusing to stay near it at all. Yusuf ran from the room, but in doing so, he showed what true courage looks like.